of the university's work in this space and engaging with schools and colleges typically doesn't begin until sort of 15, 16, 17. And what we were finding in our research was that this was just far too late. So if you look, for example, at sort of socio-economic markers or ethnicity or gender, you find some pretty shocking statistics. So, for example, by the time you get to GCSE, the stats that were published at the time showed that only 21.4% of people taking GCSEs were female. Only 19% were coming from some of the lowest socio-economic markers, which means, of course, that you've literally got a pool approaching zero by the time you get to people considering university and then subsequently a career in ICT. So we thought we needed to do something quite different, and rather than sort of the engagement targeting that sort of 15, 16, 17-year-olds, we would actually be targeting uh, diverse young people aged between 11 and sort of 14, ideally, so that we actually begin to inspire that generation to be thinking about how ICT can be used in a range of different settings. And essentially, if I just bring up the slides, let me just, sorry, Aileen, I'll just do it now. Share. Okay. Just to sort of talk you through what Aileen's been supporting us with. So we've so far developed 3 workshops which have been hosted at the university, designed to give different types of uh, research challenges to the students. We've made sure that these are fully costed, so there's no barrier for the students or the schools to participate. And we're going to make all the resources we use fully available from our website at the beginning of next year, so that any other teachers and educators can freely use the tools. And also, we've tried to ensure that there's a section in each around sort of digital art to show that the sorts of skills you can develop can be utilized in other ways, not just in science. And again, that sort of draws on some of the experience we've had of involving artists in the creative process throughout. And we're planning a kind of showcase for all the students in February at the Think Tank, which is a museum in Birmingham. They've been very keen to work with us on this, and we're going to be inviting their parents, families, to see the output of some of the work that they've undertaken. So just to give you a bit of an example of some of the things that we've done, we've used some of the work we've been doing in mathematical models in epilepsy to uh, help them understand how these sorts of tools and computational methods can be used, particularly in the context of treatment, and the idea that you can alter the brain network in a certain way in order to reduce the numbers of seizures that the brain generates. And we've created a really nice app that enables them to actually explore different ways of manipulating a dynamic brain network in order to achieve the desired outcomes. And this is actually built around ongoing research that actually is happening clinically at the moment. So over in France, there's a multi-site clinical study where they are using effectively these types of mathematical models developed by a group who we have a close relationship over in Marseille with, in order to guide the surgical decision-making process. Another one we've carried out is it's called Become a MedTech Entrepreneur. And the idea here is that you can use various digital tools like smartwatches to measure different aspects of physiology. In particular, stress is one of the ones that many of these smartwatches now have ways of measuring. Essentially, it's built around heart rate variability. And again, they developed ways of interpreting the data and getting a handle on how you can come up with things like a stress score or other things like this. And then in the third activity, we've been using what are called biomarkers. So these are properties of the data that correlate with particular aspects of disease, and using tools for machine learning to improve and support the diagnosis. And in this case, we were focusing on hormone cycles as a biomarker of disease. So in a number of different diseases, subtle changes in hormone rhythms can correlate with disease. And so we were using this as an example. Aileen, I wondered if you had any thoughts or observations from having conducted some of these workshops that might be useful to share.
Yeah, so I've done 2 so far. I've got the final one this week, and I think, like John said, the goal of the workshops too, it's not necessarily to teach them to code or anything within this time, but it's more, yeah, about the inspiration and kind of showing them the opportunities we can give them or the non-stereotypical avenues to go down. But what I found so far is the days can always be slightly chaotic when you've got 30 kids in a room, so we try our best. But they all seem to like really understand the concepts we were getting at, and that was like the biggest thing. You know, no matter how the day goes, they really seem to be engaged with what we were trying to show them and like the healthcare aspect and the applications and stuff. But by the end, they were asking loads of questions, and that was kind of like the most satisfying thing. It was like, okay, regardless of kind of whether they completed the activity or it was just a bit of a chaotic day, like they really understood what we were trying to do, which was really nice. And the feedback from the teachers too has been really positive. So yeah, and they're really happy as well that the other workshops will be available for them. So yeah, we're just fine tuning them to put them on the website. But yeah, I think this different angle of kind of like showing them technology and how it can be used for different like interdisciplinary work has been really useful for both the kids and the schools, I think.
Great. Yeah. And I mean, I think one of the other learnings is that don't be shy about what you can actually introduce even at this sort of age. That I think people have a and kids have a much greater capacity and appetite for learning than perhaps sometimes they're given credit for. So, we didn't, obviously we've made sure we've conveyed the information in a different way, but we haven't sought to remove the complexity of the subject matter. And that's been, really positive in terms of seeing how the kids have engaged with this. So obviously we've got this event today, and we're looking to actually identify opportunities to collaborate more closely across the wider computer science community. Uh, Aileen conducted the survey, and we're going to be making the results of that survey fully public and think about how we can build on some of the momentum that today's event is creating. And in terms of what we've got planned next, as we mentioned, we've got the showcase in February, and then we're looking to build on that with what we're calling a hackathon weekend, which will be more of an opportunity for some of the kids who have participated in these taster sessions to kind of deep dive a bit further and to really start to actually develop new skills, develop their confidence. And that then hones down to hopefully some work placements where we'll be looking to trial some placements within the centre and perhaps some aligned centres depending on the topics of interest. And that'll be over a couple of weeks in the summer. And really, the idea that we're looking to try out here is to sort of explore a number of kind of case studies for different interactions to get a feel and flavour for what works well, where things can be improved. Again, with the idea of driving some kind of cultural change, so working with the university to ensure that we are engaging students at a younger age, particularly in areas where it's clear that GCSE A-level uptake is really, really reduced in certain communities. And so whilst our focus is on CS, there are other areas, other subjects which have similar challenges. And so actually some of the case studies that we're developing here in the context of CS could well translate quite naturally to other areas. So I think that's probably enough from me because I want to make sure my colleagues get plenty of airtime in advance of the questions. Is the plan, Aileen, to take questions at the end of all three, I think, right?
Yeah, I think so. That'll kind of run smoother. So yeah, thanks for that,
Perfect.
John. And I think if we go on to you, Paul, now, if that's okay.
Okay, I'll just share my screen. So for those of you who were in Joe's session, you've heard a lot about the CS Fund project already. So this is something we've basically been doing for 20 years. Aim of inspiring kids and supporting teachers through research, using research as a way of getting people excited about computer science was essentially the original idea. So what Computer Science Fund consists of is a bunch of things, but the core of it is a free magazine series that we send to schools. What was a website is now a blog, and then a series of talks and workshops, or what I tend to think of as shows rather than just lectures, that are aimed at kids, but also over the years we've also been doing things for teachers as well. And what makes us different from a lot of other, if not most other public engagement projects, is we're not focused on our own area, or certainly not just our own research projects. We're focused on absolutely all ICT computer science research. In fact, even more than that, we're focused on interdisciplinary computer science research. So my definition of computer science is anything that excites me. So, you know, that goes way beyond what people traditionally think of computer science, because computer science gets its fingers in everywhere, whether that's history, healthcare, archaeology, whatever. There are angles that computer science is involved. So over the years, for the last 20 years, we've had up to 2,000 UK secondary schools take copies of our secondary school magazine. We've now got a primary magazine that we're building up the numbers of that. And this is feedback from the beginning. This magazine, it's simply awesome, was from a student, and the most inspired bit of literature for youngsters was from a teacher way back at the beginning. And the idea, we set it up originally, when I came to Queen Mary, I was given the job nobody wanted because I was the last one in, which was director of communications, which meant basically a whole bunch of things, including turn around our undergraduate applications, but also give us a better reputation for our research, and public engagement was kind of partly what that was about. But with Peter McCohen, who was the director of teaching at the time, we decided turning around recruitment was a mug's game, and we weren't going to do that. So why don't we just focus on public engagement, which we were both excited about and wanted to do, and had this vision that it would make a difference. So we set about, so we stopped. What I was told I ought to do is go out, do lots of talks and workshops at schools, telling them how wonderful Queen Mary was, and telling them about courses and what they could do if they came here, and there was this program or that program. And we just threw all of that out and said, let's go out and just be exciting about computer science and talk about our research interests and the things we were doing. So we were doing pure public engagement and not trying to sell Queen Mary at all, selling the subject essentially. And interestingly, this is what it did to our applications. So I arrived in 2004. We started Computer Science for Fun about May 2005, and every year thereafter we had a massive increase in applications. So even though we'd stopped trying to sell Queen Mary and stopped trying to sell computer science as a undergraduate subject, we completely and immediately turned around the applications. So here, most of their applications weren't even people with A levels. Now I have that many students, if not more than that many students actually, that I teach in the first year. And you know, we're not in clearing anymore. People laughed when I said my aim was to get us out of clearing back at this point, and said there's no way that will ever happen, but we haven't been in clearing for core computer science for several years. So even if what you really want is make money, get students, it turns out altruistic public engagement is a way to do that, far more successful than actually just trying to sell your degrees. So what do we do? Well, a whole bunch of things on this new project. We've been focusing on diversity, careers, entrepreneurship, picking sort of specific projects around the things that EPSRC said they were interested in. So we've created a wide range of diversity portals about LGBTQ, women, Black history, Asian, any variation of diversity I could think of. We've put together articles about it and publicised them. We've created this set of primary diversity posters. So a lot of what we've been focusing on is actually down to primary. In the past, we always focused on secondary largely. We've created careers portals recently because it was Entrepreneurship Week. We did a whole bunch of articles about research into companies and startups. So down at the primary school level, though, we've created this new set of magazines, and in particular this Primary Puzzles magazine that we give out to primary schools for free. I also do workshops, so I was trying to count. I think I've done something like 14 or 15 primary school workshops in the last year, despite the fact that I have no time, as well as carrying on doing things for sixth formers and other kinds of workshops that are all, again, I do talks about my research. Oh, and aside from this is a lot of what we're doing here is more dissemination, but in terms of my research, my PhD students all work with PPI groups, for example, and I've had a series of projects of researchers doing pure participatory design research where they're working directly with the communities they're designing for. So we do a kind of full range. One of the things that's been there throughout from the beginning, partly because Peter McCone, who I started all of this with, was an amateur magician and loved magic. He came up with lots of magic tricks. I found lots of computer science stories to link them to. Turns out magic is computation. It's just computation with physical objects in the real world in general. So we've done magic shows for years. Well, for the full 20 years, basically. Now I'm doing a lot of magic shows for primary school kids with the Royal Institution. And this is our book, so it makes a great Christmas present for anybody interested in computer science who you're still struggling to find somebody to buy a present for. The other thing that I've been doing, though, is actually what is essentially sociology analysis. I've got this weird history in computer science that I started off at one weird end of computer science doing formal methods and theoretical computer science, and now I'm doing sociology. So I've drifted all the way across computer science from one extreme to the other. But what we've been doing is looking at what makes good public engagement. What is it about a particular way of teaching or presenting that works or doesn't work? Because a lot of what we do in our shows is unplugged computing, where we use Blue Peter technology. So, in terms of things people were talking about earlier, we wire kids together as neurons and turn them into a brain that plays Snap, for example. And so some people have done research that suggests that kind of unplugged teaching doesn't really work. And so I was interested because it works for me in certain ways, at least anyway. So what makes it work? What makes a good explanation? And so there's this sociology theory called legitimation code theory, which is all about knowledge practices and what makes them work and doesn't. So we've been doing research about that. And so there are particular things, semantics and autonomy. Semantics is about how you link abstract technical language down to everyday things that people understand in a way that people engage with and can understand. What makes good explanation. Autonomy is about how you mix two subjects. So particularly interested in this, I teach magic, I also teach computer science. I try and do it at the same time. what leads them to learning both, as opposed to just going out thinking they had a fun magic show. And autonomy actually gives you a visualization, a way to plot lesson plans and ask what's strong or weak about the way I've planned that. So I don't have time to go into that in a lot more detail, but happy to talk with anybody about LCT at other points, and you can find it on my blog. But I'll kind of stop there. I'll leave you with a magic trick. So this is one where you count the robots. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 robots. It's just a jigsaw, though. If we move the jigsaw pieces about, there were 17 robots. There's now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. A whole robot just disappeared. Where did it go? Was it eaten by a green monster? Did it teleport away? Oh, it's back again. There were 17 now. And this works on a physical jigsaw. It's not any ICT trickery, but there are major ICT lessons behind this, linked to my research on human error, for example, or just basic ones about what an algorithm is. The thing about magic, it's incredibly engaging, that people just want to know the answers and they want to explore more. So as I was saying earlier, at the last weekend, I was in a bookshop, basically just doing my science festival stall for harried parents, trying to find presents for people and getting them to stop and see a magic trick. And then they stayed and wanted to know what on earth was going on, and I got to explain some deep science to people as they went. But that's basically what I've got in terms of slides. We were asked about things like lessons. Are we going to go through that later, or do you want me to talk?
That's fine. I was like, we can kind of come on to the questions after. But that was great. That's so interesting. I'm like obsessed now with staring at someone. I think someone put in the answer, whether it was what, double frog. That's very exciting though. I like the combination of magic and computer science. But yeah, we can chat a bit more. So yeah, any questions, pop them in the chat. But we'll move on to Keeley now, and then we can get into the panel discussion.
How can I go? I'm still looking at the puzzle and trying to solve the magic. How can I possibly top that now? Okay, right. Here we go. I will try and share for the last time. Okay, here we go. Hopefully it will work. I bet you can't see the full screen, can you? I'm just going to do it like this because of time is the essence. Are you okay with it being like on this size, or do you want full screen?
That's okay, don't worry.
Okay, it's just easier. Okay, so my project was about working with communities, really starting back to the ideation, co-production, etc. But it was all about training up and developing a training package for early career researchers, PhD students, and SMEs. We got one in the end, to actually look at how to do public engagement and co-production, okay, with working with marginalised communities. So that was kind of like what the project was all about. I'm just going to click through quick. So basically we worked with other universities. What that means is I led the project from Manchester Met, but we actually recruited students from Manchester Salford universities as well. And we had an advisor, David Leslie, from the Alan Turing Institute, and we had 2 companies as well, Scientific Scriptia and Noisy Cricket. We worked across the areas of Greater Manchester, and the idea was to empower the public voices in the space of artificial intelligence, data and data science by working with our Ps, which stands for Public Engagement Ambassadors, okay, and to try and aspire and attract more people to understand about the area and engage in research. So that's what our aim was. Okay, now what you're not going to see is my nice interactive slide because I can't share it, but here we go. So we worked on the basis of 3 pods. First of all, what we did was I did roadshows across the 3 universities to recruit potential Ps who were interested in taking part in the project. What we then did was we devised a 4-day training program It was a collaborative training program with all our partners, which we delivered in April 23, and all the Ps took part. Our initial target was to train up 20. We had 23 people complete that training program. Those resources will be available in 2025 on our website. They're not quite there yet. Pod 2 was all about mentoring. We wanted the Ps who had engaged in the training to really think about how they could embed public engagement and co-production into their own research projects. So Pod 2 is their mentoring. We had the idea from that mentoring was that basically I did it. So I've already logged 97 hours of one-to-one mentoring with Ps for the last 2 years. And the output was that they developed a 12-month public engagement plan that was centered around their research. So this was kind of in parallel to Pod 3. I think it's okay doing training, but actually where you really learn is being engaged with communities. So Pod 3 learning by doing is we interacted with 3 different communities, one at Inspire in Levenshulme, the Tatton in Salford, and Back on Track in Manchester. And through these, projects evolved. These were projects that were led by community members, and the Ps got to actually try out the training. We got to work with them as well. And then ultimately, we will create this resource, Data and AI Ethics in a Box, which will also be available in the early part of 2025. So that was the kind of project. So I told you we trained up 23 Ps. These are the ones that decided to stay with us. And what that means is that the path to doing these projects has took over a year. And all these people on here that you can see all decided to stay with us, work with communities and share their learning. And we originally wanted 10. Okay, we had about 11 or 12 that carried on all the way through. And Femi here is one of the people who has his own business. So I think it was quite interesting. Okay, so jumping on, just want to highlight the 3 projects very briefly because they're all very different. What I wanted you to say, to kind of like share with you was that in our project, in our work plan as an EPSR public champion, we had this whole work package on these projects and we had this vision of how long they would actually take. And when we onboarded Ps originally, those who had done the training, they come up with a concept of how they would use that time. Okay. And what I want to say in here is what it was at the beginning and actually what the reality was completely different. Okay. So essentially, we budgeted and planned in the project to be 4 2-hour co-production meetings, and it ended up being a lot more. So to summarise that very briefly, I've called it reality and timeline, okay? To give you an idea of one of them, ideation took a lot longer to find the challenges, okay? They came up with some very interesting ideas like a charter for artificial intelligence, a video and educational resources. Co-production sessions were completely doubled. We needed a lot more. And then what we had to do, remember, was to produce the output. One of the projects led to a community video. So in this, we had the community members then take part in storyboarding, in scripting, in deciding what was in there, being actual actors, pre and post production. So you can see it became a lot more involved. And what I do want to say here, even though they're not here today, if it wasn't for the really enthusiastic public engagement ambassadors we had, then these projects wouldn't have actually happened because they did well above the amount of time that they were allocated as volunteers. Okay, so what were the projects? First one was a People's Charter for AI, and this was at Inspire in Levenshulme. And what was really important about this is the community decided, hey, we want a logo, okay? So we got the people in the community to actually design a logo, and then we employed a student graphic designer to help us actually come up with the logo for the charter. And you know what the people said about judging? They said they wanted EPSRC to actually judge blind the entries. They wanted the funder to judge it. So guess what? That's exactly what they did. And again, they spent some time looking at this and ranked the winners. So output from the first project then at Inspire was actually this People's Charter for AI. 10 principles that they wanted businesses and organisations, public and private sector to work towards. They wanted it to convey what looked good looked like in terms of use of AI in different products and services. We managed to do 5 languages. Again, we've got quite a bit of way to go on that. And what they wanted in this particular booklet was not only principles of a charter, but how do businesses actually implement that in actual practice? So I can't paste anything on Padlet and I can't share anything in the chat, and it's not on the website. So Aileen, it's a question for you later. I'd love to share the resources, but I'm not sure how. This was an example of the principles that were developed, and it took 8 months to actually do this with the community members. You'll notice the language is their own. They did not like AI. Why? Because some community members who are in rural communities, AI stands for artificial insemination. Okay, they wanted artificial intelligence to be basically listed as a full word. Okay, very quickly. Second project was all about creating this video. Their topics were, I want AI to be demystified. I want to know about AI and its uses around me. So again, we spent quite a number of sessions storyboarding, community members deciding on what they would like to be included. And it came up with things like healthcare, online banking, etc. So we used a variety of different methods to do this. We got people to draw. You can see there, you know, people were concerned about autonomous vehicles, for example, in the future and what that meant, but they took part in every single session. And again, can't share it on here, but this is our video. It's now available on YouTube that we actually scripted and designed with community members, and they actually feature within it. And our last one before I stop talking is the third project. So this one was at Back on Track in Manchester. They are a charity for people impacted by homelessness. They're an amazing session. They run lots of different activities for community members. And what we did here was look at a project where they were really concerned about AI in recruitment, okay? So they wanted to look at how can we mitigate the risks and rewards of using AI for people who are impacted, who may not have those digital skills. So again, this was quite a long project. It's still coming to the end. We've got a list of requirements now about what good looks like in terms of what these community members want. So you can see really these projects don't end, they just start conversations. So lastly, to end, we're currently in the final phases now. We're putting together the resources, data and AI ethics in a box. It's not on the website just yet. And lastly, we're doing a lot of work to sustain what good looks like at the end of a project. So for example, I'm involved in a new cross-government inquiry on AI and skills. We've got some people involved in this project. We did some round tables. We got the people from London to come up to the north and have some conversations in communities with people about their concerns. So I believe it's just a starter, but there's so much more to do. And with that, I will stop sharing.
Thanks, Keeley. That's really interesting. I feel like you've covered a lot of ground up in Manchester, but thank you all for sharing your projects. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, pop them in the chat, but I'll start with a couple that I have generally about engagement and your projects and your lives, I suppose. So I just wanted to first ask you all what the impact of doing public engagement has been generally on you and your career and personally as well, because I think it's something I think you've all said of like you've got long careers and sounds like it's been like interwoven in all your careers so far, but I think there's a career aspect and a kind of personal aspect. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that and how that's affected or impacted you. Anyone feel free to jump in first. I won't pick on anyone.
Well, shall I say how it's impacted me?
Yeah, go on, Paul, you start.
Well, I was actually made a professor on the back of me having this international reputation for doing public engagement, together with, to a lesser extent, probably teaching. And I was explicitly told at one point my research wasn't anywhere near good enough to be made a professor. And the first time I applied as well, I wasn't made a professor on the grounds that my research wasn't strong enough, despite their rules saying at the time that research didn't matter and 2 out of 3 of these things and having an international reputation was enough. So I had to go and complain and sort of ask for some feedback about why on earth this wasn't good enough. So it wasn't easy, but I had somebody high up on my side that ultimately they then gave me the professorship. This also, however, means I feel very shaky ground ever since, because they still believe that you only make professor if you have a really solid research output and bring in millions of pounds in money, which actually I was back then anyway. But you know, brilliant ref entry. So in that sense, it's worked brilliant for me since I started doing it full on. The other impact it's had on me is it's kept me sane, because given the workloads we have now and the stress, which is absolutely phenomenal, the only thing that keeps me sane is doing things that are fun. And so I de-stress by going out to a primary school and having 30 kids being incredibly enthusiastic. And you know, I just feed off of their enthusiasm, because there's nothing better than primary school kids basically when you're a treat that's come in to do something that they find amazing, like doing magic. My kids from my local primary school will, if they see me in the street, call me the magic man now. And we've been trying to the teacher was kind of trying to re-educate them into, no, he's the science man, he's the computer science man. But yeah, I mean, so in terms of sanity, to the extent that I am still sane, it's probably due to 20 years of public engagement.
That's amazing though. And I feel like the Magic Man, I think, is a an okay title as well, I think. But I think sorry, just to kind of add or jump in a question quickly for you as well then. I think one conversation we had earlier was that the balance of like it's amazing that you find doing engagement keeping you sane, but then like the balance of hitting your research and engagement at the same time. Do you find that difficult, or do you kind of just make, I don't know how you find it, do you just make the time?
Well, it's the thing that's always been difficult has been finding time for research. I actually teach our biggest first year module basically, so I do our intro programming, and that eats up all my time. So for a lot of the year, what I'm doing is nothing but that, and anything else I have to do in my own time anyway. So you know, to some extent, my personal research career has suffered, but that's not because of public engagement. It's because of the incredibly high teaching load we've had that gets normalized. Every year they add another 50 students and then normalize it as though that was fine because you didn't die last year, so they're going to throw another 50 at you next year. But public engagement has actually kept me in touch with the research to some extent, because I can do that without the massive sort of solid chunks of time. And I can kind of keep up to date breadth with what other people are doing. I mean, I have PhD students that are working on stuff in parallel, and they're doing kind of the research that I am involved with at the moment. But I've then gone on this sort of random walk into sociology and trying to understand what makes good public engagement. So now that is the area of research I'm actually most excited about, and that's come about, well, a mixture of because of teaching, but it's come about largely because of public engagement. The case studies I've done have been around my public engagement work, and kind of seeing how I can find ways to improve them by looking at what this theory tells about what I'm doing. So in that sense, it's given me a whole new exciting research strand that I never would have thought about looking at if I hadn't been doing this kind of stuff. And again, that's just so much fun. I kind of can play around with that in my own time to some extent, and in small pockets of time.
I love it. Yeah, I love that it's given you this new area of kind of research and expertise, I suppose. But yeah, it's so interesting.
It also potentially can explain how you get long-term impact as well. I mean, the way I've been using it is just in a sort of what makes a good lesson sort of area, but it's about knowledge practice, and transformational impact is a knowledge practice. And so when I get time, that's something I want to look at, you know, how do you turn stuff into impact. Or what is it that makes the difference? And I think LCT, well, sociology generally has ways, lenses of looking at that and helping us do it better. Because I think a lot of what happens kind of comes and goes. While you're doing it, it's having an impact, and then the impact's fizzled away once you stop doing it.
Yeah, that's interesting. And our next session around impact too will be, I think, an interesting add-on to that too. So before I add any more questions, I'll move on to Keeley and John if you've got any thoughts or want to share anything about how engagement has impacted you.
John, do you want to go first, or do you want me to?
You go first, Keeley. I think
Okay.
people have heard enough from me, so it'd be good to hear more from you. It's
They've probably
fascinating.
heard a lot more from me as well. Yeah, I would actually agree with what Paul has said. I'm quite happy to admit that my journey to be a professor hasn't been a straight thing, and I actually got it on the third time, and it has nothing to do at all with public engagement stuff. It's something I'm passionate. I agree with Paul. It keeps you sane. It is the most rewarding thing you can actually do, and it shapes you into a better researcher. I also think that I love what Paul has done by moving into that sociology space. And I guess what really happened is when we did our P's training program, I learned about all those things like power and positionality because I was working with social scientists and businesses that deliver that. So I think adopting all that has changed and shaped. And for me, in terms of research, how can we build that better in terms of AI and that kind of space? That's what's really, really important. So impact wise, nothing to do with career development. What I am seeing now though is with the Rec 29 hat on of being a coordinator, impact case studies are really, really important now, but it's about what is impact. And I think in academia, from what I'm seeing in my space, is that researchers don't really understand what non-academic impact is. It's not about the number of keynotes and all that kind of stuff. It's actually going out there and making change. And I think that public engagement is a great vehicle to do that.
Thanks, Keeley. And we'll go to you, John, now, finally.
Sure. So I guess I had a slightly different experience in the sense that, I was appointed professor at the University of Exeter, and it was only sort of after that time that a significant amount of my sort of public engagement work emerged. And I guess that meant I was in a quite fortunate position in the sense that I could afford to take perhaps more risks, to try things that if I was at an earlier career stage, and as Paul alluded to, 10, 15 years ago, many unis were very much focused on the research outputs as the primary metric, and all the others are really nice to have, despite what they might say in their criteria. So I always felt quite a sense of responsibility, I guess, to try and ensure that we could shape our activities in a way that would enable people to gain experience whilst hopefully still moving towards the goals that were really important. So this is why sort of earlier on I talked a bit about some of the work we did through ISSF to really help shape research collaborations more definitively, and having vehicles via which public engagement and involvement would work both ways. And I think for me, that's been something that's always been really important, because in a sense, I always think of it as sort of somehow, how do you make these sorts of activities scalable? And it's been fascinating actually hearing Paul and Keeley's stories, because you see really nice ways that they've made their activities really scalable. And, I've sort of tried to do that more by training other researchers to go on and do the journey. But actually, hearing these other stories, I mean, there's some fascinating ways in which one can go about this. And that's why events like this are really great, I think, for sharing different ideas, best practice, etc. And I guess in terms of some of the impact it's had on me personally, I've made sort of lifelong friends, I guess, as a result of it. I'm still regularly in touch with Paul Jepson, the artistic director from the Northcots, although he's moved on to other roles now. We're still in touch, and in fact, we've involved him through one of our other EPSRC projects, utilizing his skills in performance and training to support researchers in another project. So, there's been real opportunities there for us that's been created by that engagement work.
Thanks, John. I think that's one of the things that I think it's interesting to hear about, is that personal kind of aspect, of the impact of that too. And I think if we can kind of show more people that as well, I think people obviously are very career driven, which is great. But I think seeing the impact across your whole life too, especially with communication or like friendships, or even I think like you mentioned earlier, John, about how you can start to think about your own research differently by having that creative aspect or like collaboration. So yeah, it's really interesting as well to see how everyone's path is different too. I think that's another key thing that we can kind of share, is that I think there's not one unique way of doing things as well. And I think if I go for one more question and then we'll move on to what's in the chat. And I think you probably kind of touched on this already, but is there anything like specifically valuable that you learned that you think is key now for people here to learn or take away, whether it's kind of logistically engagement wise or just something over time you figured is a key thing in starting out in public engagement? Anything springs to mind?
I mean, very briefly from me, just to really re-emphasize what I said earlier about researchers ourselves, we don't have all the answers. And if you only base your experience or your research questions around conversations you have in universities or in hospital environments, you're really going to miss an awful lot. And it's really, really key that you involve and understand the public perspective on whatever research challenge you're undertaking.
Yeah, that's great. Any other thoughts?
So, I mean, I've got a whole bunch of lessons over the years. A couple I kind of mentioned already. So altruism actually really works. If you go in not with the aim of what your university wants, which is turning people into students, but just go because of the excitement of the subject and be excited about stuff, then you'll naturally be inspiring. So aim to have fun yourself, and the more fun you have, the more successful you'll probably be, because your infectious enthusiasm will spread to them, and then to some extent it doesn't matter what you're saying. If you're being enthusiastic, then you'll take people along with you. One of the other things that we kind of learned early was, or I guess we sort of built in from the start, is don't talk down to people. I think John said something kind of equivalent to this, but we've never written for kids. I mean, actually, it's a little bit different writing for primary school kids, because then you've got to simplify the language quite a lot more. But for secondary school kids, we didn't write for kids. We just wrote accessibly and in a fun, interesting way. And the result of that is, over the years, we've had lots of adults saying what we think, what we do is really interesting and helpful. And we've even had professors come up to us and say, oh, I learned something from that article of yours. And by doing, if you write down to kids, it's sort of, first of all, it's a bit patronizing, but secondly, you lose that ability to be general, and you really don't need to. The other thing we learned kind of early on, looking at what other people were doing on, like when we were doing the Royal Society Summer Exhibition, a lot of people were giving out handouts and takeaways that are just standard, whatever marketing company the university give us. Oh, they can give us pens, they can give us beer mats with logos on them, and that you just give out, but they don't really properly link. Whereas the best thing to do is find things to give out that are a lesson in themselves. So that's kind of what that teleporting robot trick was early on. That's something people can take away, and they can go and do a magic trick for somebody else, and they can explain some computer science to somebody else, and it's reinforcing it. And we kind of made sure we had this idea that I used to call a sticky web, that I would go and do a school talk and I would leave behind magazines so that people could go away, and if I had excited them, they've got something to read to, you know, find out more, go deeper. And the magazine would then take them to the website if they wanted more, and then they would find thousands of articles. Or if they came to the website, that would link them onto the magazine. Or if we'd send a magazine out to the schools, then that would take you to the website, you know, so you could always go deeper. We were giving people ways of it not being just this intangible, I was there for half an hour and excited somebody for half an hour. If I really manage to excite them, I've left them something that will take them further. And I think that kind of thing actually is really quite important. The more, try and not make it just a one-off thing, but draw them in whatever way is appropriate for the research that you're talking about. And that might mean pulling them into a PPE style group. And that's something actually I think that we should be doing. In medicine, it's totally standard that you have public patient engagement groups that are involved from the start. And I don't see why it shouldn't be the same for any research that's working with stuff that is ultimately for people, changing the way things will happen. So I would like to sort of encourage just the more general version of a PPE group, a public engagement group, that everybody, all PhD students, ought to have public engagement groups that, you know, they talk about their research too, that surveys are looked at, their research questions are discussed with all the way through from the beginning. I don't know how you would make that happen particularly, but I think that is something that actually ought to happen, because we need public engagement to be really embedded. And at the moment, it's just an add-on. It's for people who feel like doing it, and and anybody else can just ignore it. But yeah, so I guess they're my main lessons that I've learned over the years. But the main one is have fun.
Yeah, I think of all the lessons, I think they're great lessons to learn. And I think, yeah, I think like you said, when you see someone who's enthusiastic about something, I think it always sticks. And it's just, yeah, I mean, we've been to many dull lectures, I think, as to know that what the difference between an enthusiastic person and someone who's not quite keen to be there. But yeah, that was great. Thank you, Paul. And anything from you, Keeley?
Yeah, I just want to say I really, really like that idea. I think it's really important to have those groups and embed it rather than the add-on. So I'm definitely going to say yes to that. I just thought I'd add another spin as well. So I guess really, because I came from a really theoretical and applied traditional AI background for the last 20 odd years, I think one of the interesting things is now going out there and talking about research to private sectors, SMEs, small micros, etc., and public sector. So this is another way in, and a lot of these often have lunch and learn sessions. So in your local area, if you can connect or find maybe business development managers at your university, or people working on knowledge transfer partnerships where you can actually go in and talk about your research. It's a different audience to schools, it's a different audience to community members, but actually the questions you get, and you are kind of engaging, because you're going to get a whole wealth of new questions that you've never even thought about for your research. And the only other thing I would say is roadshows. So we've done them now on 4 projects. The worst one, we had no one turn up. Yeah. Sat there with everything ready and no one came, just one person who was the champion. So sometimes they can go wrong, and that's absolutely okay. And unpicking why that went wrong, we didn't have one kind of person who we'd liaise with who was really, really strong, wanted to really talk about the project. So it's almost like when you reach out, and that might be through digital exclusion officers, or actually going into community cafes, sitting down and seeing what's going on and looking picking who to talk to, and it's about those initial conversations, but they take time. But that's how we've done it, and we've done quite a lot in the past 3 years.
Yeah, that's great, Keeley. Thank you. And I think following on what you've just said, and I know there's been a lot of chat in the chat right now because there was a question about how to even like start getting into engagement too. And I think, yeah, things like roadshows, I think you mentioned, are really important. And yeah, a lot of small funding and people like science fairs and things people have mentioned in the chat about that. So hopefully that might have answered this person's question. And also in the next session, with EPSRC and Nick, hopefully some funding questions will be covered in that too. And I know any of the links that people have put in the chat, by the way, I'm going to paste into the Padlet so they're there for keeps, so you won't lose all these as well. So hopefully that question has been covered. If anyone has any other questions, or I might have missed one in the chat, do put them in here. Otherwise, I may continue going with questions because I always have a lot of questions. One I wanted to ask as well is around EDI and diversity in computer sciences. I know we've all kind of mentioned as well how it's a big kind of area of focus for a lot of people, particularly in computer science, and I do think it's changing. But how do you feel we can incorporate engagement or the role of engagement in diversity within the kind of computer science field? And or like, have you seen then a big change over recently, or how do you think we can utilize engagement to diversify this community? And I think as like a slight add-on to, I think even thinking about how we do public engagement as well, because a lot of public engagement people are often just like white women too, which is great. We just need more and more public engagement people, but even then the people delivering engagement, I think we need to help diversify too in that sense. So yeah, that was, sorry, a long question, but how do you see engagement within the role of diversifying computer science?
So I might have a very quick answer to that one, and then I'll talk about it. Okay, so just to give you an idea, on another project called the People's Panel for AI, the first time we went out when we did roadshows, we weren't actually engaging with people in the Muslim community. Okay, and we didn't know why. Maybe it's because it was 2 white women, as you just said there. Let's be really brutal and hit the nail on the head there. So when we got funding and supported by Manchester City Council, what we did was I brought on my colleague Colleen, who actually is part of that community, right? And it's all about, they knew Kaleem, he was trusted in that community. You know, he went to the mosque every week, his family, and also had the online teaching and schooling that they also have on Saturdays. So by making our team more diverse, enabled us to reach more diverse communities, because people want to see people like them. However they stereotype, however, whether they've got unconscious bias or not, that's what they want to see. So there's my quick answer.
Thank you. No, I agree. And I think that building trust is key with, like, especially like these minority communities too. I think it's such a big factor. And I think someone mentioned earlier too, how often, even if we are engaging a lot of communities, we can just be engaging the same communities. So you kind of get stuck in a loop, and that is a problem within itself. But yeah, I think that's a really important thing of diversifying us first as well. Anything else from Paul or John?
So I would agree with that, and I've always felt I was exactly the wrong person for doing this, because I'm exactly the stereotype in every way you could imagine of what a computer scientist stereotype is. But on the other hand, I used to do a really popular series of women in computing talks in schools, and basically I started it by apologizing for all the stupid things men had said that would put girls off doing computing. And you know, that was really popular, and it as a talk, and I believe it did have impact. So even if you are the wrong person, you can still do this kind of stuff. But I think it is vital. You know, we've made diversity at the center of our Champions project, and I think one of the things, you know, we were doing posters, for example, now. And the reason I started doing that is all these schools I visited, I suddenly realized they all had posters on the walls, but it was Dijkstra and Turing and von Neumann, and then you would have Ada Lovelace if you were lucky. And so I just sort of thought we've got to change that, because when the walls are busy saying the wrong story, you're already losing. And that's why we've put a lot of effort into sending posts out, and they are massively popular. Teachers just love that. So if you can come up with kind of good role models. The other thing is getting a wide range of role models, I think, is important, because the trouble with Ada Lovelace, for example, is she's Victorian lady. She's not actually that relevant. So what we were trying to do is, for example, just write about the work of PhD students, undergraduate projects, so that even if it's kind of me writing it, I am trying to give this normalized version of women in computing or Black history, and our portal about Black history is called Black History Present and Future, because it's not Black history, it's the future, it's what's happening now, and trying to find more role models that are of all ages, all stages. The other thing, pictures of role models, like Grace Hopper or the like, tend to be photos of when they were old. So what you're presenting is old women perhaps can do this. And again, that's not necessarily the right thing for a teenager to make them believe this could be me. So yeah, trying to find. I mean, one of the things I've tried to do, especially, we started with women about 15 years ago, and basically my idea was, I'm just going to throw as many articles as I possibly can. I'm going to find every story I can that I've got time to write about women, and I'm just going to inundate people with stories about women, because if you only have one or two or three, that doesn't really prove anything. Whereas if you've got 500 stories, then nobody can complain, nobody can argue that women aren't making a big difference. And it's not just big differences, it's not Turing Award winners. You need a few of those just to show that people can achieve, but you also need small things, because people can believe they can do small things, but it's a big jump to believe you're going to be a Turing Award winner, which is why we were doing kind of undergraduate projects, and just focusing on, well, this was the other thing, focusing on not who they were, but what they'd done. So fine, this is a woman, or fine, this is an Afro-Caribbean man or Afro-Caribbean woman or whatever, but that's sort of incidental. What we're writing about is the exciting thing they did. And one of the things I noticed back when we started doing stuff about women, you would get a lot of stories that focused on the fact that they had 4 children and had taken a career break, and still they'd managed to do amazing research. I couldn't see how that was really inspiring, basically. Perhaps for some people that's what, but that just made it sound hard rather than something that anybody could do. They were just saying how hard their lives were to actually manage to do this. So we glossed over all of that, and I just go for the stories of the amazing things they've done, that they've achieved in computer science.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think Joe's put in the chat as well some links to those posters too, because they sound great. And I think having that visual representation is really important. John, do you have anything?
Yeah, I guess in the medical space, there are obviously a lot of medical charities that relate to different conditions and disorders. But I think one of the things to be aware of there is that often the diversity of the population that they represent may or may not be reflective of the population at whole. And certainly our experience in some sectors is that there can be a number of kind of bigger charities which tend to get certain demographics and certain repeating demographics that may or may not reflect what you'll see in other charities. And I guess it gets back a little bit to what Keeley said about sort of people feeling comfortable seeing people that are like them. And this, I think, does happen in some of these sorts. So one of the things you've got to be really careful about is ensuring that you're engaging with a diversity of charity partners, and for example, you know, looking to see whether there are specific charities that are focused on representing underserved communities. So in the case of epilepsy, there are a number of charities that are more specific to the West Midlands, and they are more specifically aimed at representing those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, from ethnic minorities. And I think that's really important because you don't see that sort of makeup all the time in some of the bigger charity sort of groups that you can engage with. So I think it's just another thing to be aware of when you're going down this route. That, you know, the quick win, inverted commas, go to a big charity, you'll get a lot of people's opinions quickly, but you may not be getting a representative sample of the broader population and the broader challenges. It's just something I think you need to factor in.
Yeah, definitely. I think it leads into as well what I've always heard everyone talk about too, like the accidental bias that can be put in, especially when you're doing things like computing, kind of the medical side or the research side, but then also, yeah, making sure that the research you're doing is covering all bases and all kind of communities involved. And yeah, I think what Paul said too, and I think Keeley mentioned as well, even within the trust and going back to the communities, I suppose, whether you're talking to communities around like research and things, but often people say, like how you was mentioning, Paul, how you like leave resources and things. Often people can find, if we just go to them for one thing and we never follow up with them or like keep them included, it's like you're exhausting these communities and then just like taking resources from them as well and not kind of giving back. They can be like, oh, you just come in picking our brains and ditching us and never seeing us again. So I think keeping in mind the communities you're working with, and like that long-standing relationship you have with them is really important as well, building the trust and also the impact on the research. We've got a couple of minutes left. If anyone has any questions, I know everyone's so useful at putting all these links in the chat. I'm so happy about this. There's a lot of resources that we've got. And just check and see if I've missed any questions. And if not, then we could potentially just wrap up here now and move on to our final session. But yeah, thank you all for sharing your projects and letting us pick your brains. If there's anyone has any last minute comments, feel free now. But if not, thank you all so much and for sharing all your resources. Anything that's been shared here as well, like I said before, I'll put in the Padlet. And yeah, Keeley, if there's anything you want me to share that you can't share right now, I'll figure out a way. And everything as well will be on our website after this event. All the resources from today's event will be put on our website, so we can figure that out and share everything as well.
Can I say one final thing?
Yeah, of course.
Public engagement before, try it. Evaluate it, even if it's only yourself, and don't worry if it doesn't always go to plan, because you can think about it and then get better the next time. And that's me. Started off a long time ago. You just get hopefully you get a little bit better, but you never know.
Also, I would add to that something I put in the chat, which is doing things like science stalls, whether that's in a museum, a festival, a bookshop or library or whatever, where you've got a flow of people coming past and you're just doing one small thing, is a really, really good way to get started, because you get like 50, well, it depends how much traffic you get, but you get over and over again another chance to try it and then another chance to try it. So at the end of an afternoon, you've probably worked out what works and doesn't work, and you'll have got some good, interesting feedback. And if you can do it in a way that's for primary school kids as well, so just going to your primary school and offer them to do some short session. Primary school kids are just amazingly enthusiastic, and it's far better doing it at that level than, say, sixth formers who it's impossible to get an emotion out of, and you don't find out whether it worked or not until they filled in feedback forms afterwards, when suddenly you find out they all had a wonderful time, but it never showed on their faces. But with primary school kids, it always shows. So
yeah, that's a really good tip. Yeah, and I think with those kids as well, I feel like they ask questions you definitely would never have thought of beforehand as well. So I think they're a really good demographic to start with. But yeah,
The
thank you
sessions I do
so
about artificial intelligence with sort of 9-year-olds are absolutely amazing. We have really deep philosophical conversations about artificial intelligence and what intelligence is and whatever.
That's amazing. I love that. But great, thank you so much. And we will now move on to our final workshop session. I'm going to stop and then restart the